Oh,
Hi, everyone's in, I think.
good.
I am just making sure the guys have got.
The right links.
Yeah.
Oh, Julio's in as an attendee.
That's fine. I'll upgrade him.
Benson.
Hello.
Hello, Ben. We're live and kicking already.
So there's already 35
Wow.
participants, is it?
Yeah.
Are these meant to be in there?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a few people talking about lack of references in the report.
Yeah. Ben, can we talk to you in a little while about this?
Are we live?
Live?
Yeah. There's already 41 people. There's a few people that probably just need explaining, Pauline, about
Yes.
the format.
Yeah, so just before we kick off, we're just waiting for everyone to come in. This one's the busiest of all 4 park areas so far, so I'm anticipating 100, maybe more, people coming through. So we'll probably allow it till 1:05 to start filling up. In terms of a webinar, it's different from a meeting where you can see everyone's face. Webinar is you'll see the panelists' face, but mainly you'll see the screen being shared, so that we can talk you through slides. You'll be able to chat to each other and to us on the left-hand side, but we'll ask that you put your questions in the Q&A down at the bottom there, and we're going to get Ben Clay, our counsellor, to pick out questions on that and make sure that he references the person that's asked those questions at the end as well. But Julia will go further in detail to that as well when we officially start.
Can you enable screen sharing, please, Pauline?
Sure thing. There you go.
I think you've shared screen instead of enabling screen sharing.
You're sharing your screen, Pauline.
Sorry, I'm trying to do about 4 things at once, which is never, it's never where you need to be. And I don't know why I've got 2 of the same up. Oh, there we are. Yeah, it should be, Julie, you should be able to, right, okay.
We're in.
We're in. Right.
So I think just waiting for Abigail's here. Just Andrew and John. Yeah, so just for the mute yourself before. Can you mute people, Pauline, maybe? There we go. Yeah, just in terms of, I think the panelists who aren't speaking, if they can just mute yourself when they're not speaking. And then in terms of attendee interaction, there's a chat for general comments, but there's also a Q&A function for questions that you specifically want to be answered. At the end of our presentation, we'll go through some of the most upvoted questions on Slido. Thanks very much for submitting those, really helpful. And then Ben will handpick some of the Q&A questions, maybe touching on subjects that we haven't delved so much on in the previous Slido ones, to provide sort of an option for live Q&A as well. So just feed those through as the presentation goes, as we go through the presentation. And we'll just give people another couple of minutes. So we're sure we're catching people who, it's always a challenge connecting to any kind of online event. So giving people a bit of extra time.
Yeah, a couple more minutes. We've got 102 people in now, and all the panelists are in as well. So just to let everybody know, I'm going to start recording this session when we go live, and also be streaming that on Facebook as well for people who want to watch on there.
Should we maybe start? I mean, the number of attendees isn't growing too quickly, so maybe most people are now in.
Cool, away we go.
Andrew, the stage is
Yeah,
yours.
good. Thank you. Hi, afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming along. Hopefully, we're going to be able to explain a little bit more about the Levenshulme Active Neighbourhood project and explain the proposals that have been sort of circulated around. There's obviously been a bit more information been posted in the last few days. That's some frequently asked questions, but this is just part of the kind of the pause stage to engage with you more, give you more information, but also give you a chance to speak to us about various things. Just click on next, please, Julio. Yeah, so it's a bit of a structure for the presentation. I'll do a little bit of a introduction now. Then Abigail from Sustrans is going to discuss the engagement that's been done to date. Julio is going to talk about the design process. Back to me just to discuss the next stages in the trial, and then there's an opportunity. There's been some questions that have been circulated around prior to the event on Slido that people have voted up. So we've got, I think, the top sort of 10, 12 of those. Plus, if you've got any questions, can you put them in the Q&A option? I think it's at the top right of the screen, and we can go through those. I think Ben's going to review those and sort of ask us at the end of the. Do that now, Peter. So let's skip on to the next page. Yeah, so the project teams. I'm Andrew Crompton. I'm the project manager from Manchester City Council. So I'm the sort of main lead for this project from the City Council, but also backed up by a number of engineers who work with me to help with the design. We've also got some support on project management. MCC are obviously the Planning and Highways Authority, so anything that goes on the highway has to be approved by us and through the delegated approval process that the City Council has for implemented any new schemes. So all that process is still in place for this project, and we would have to go through all these approvals before anything went in the ground. So the next group of people involved is Sustrans. Sustrans have led on the community engagement and has helped with us in terms of the design of the filter neighbourhood. I don't want to steal their thunder. They're going to talk about that in the next few slides, and the school streets project. So I'll let Abigail and Julio go through those. In terms of the Levenshulme Bee Network, they were kind of key to getting this off the ground. They wrote an initial bid. A group of people were involved and got a number of people involved as street advocates. The bid came through to Manchester City Council. We worked with them to make it more of a robust bid. We then submitted that to the Mayor's Challenge Fund. They agreed for us to have programme entry for the scheme, deliver the active streets, and the Bee Network are still there as sort of the project champions and street advocates. There's a good group of street advocates who are aware of the scheme and have also given us good feedback about how the scheme could be improved. So we work with them to help improve and make a better scheme. And last but by no means least, TFGM, they're the project funders, or the Mayor's Challenge Fund is, and I'll talk about the sort of funding process on the next slide. So the Mayor's Challenge Fund is part of the Mayor, well, Andy Burnham's Transforming Cities Fund. He's able to allocate a certain amount towards improving walking and cycling in the area. So we've successfully bid for 2.5 million and got programme entry for that. So that means that the process for the business case is that we get a programme entry. So we submit a bid and say we want to do this scheme. They'll assess that, they'll look at it and they'll say, yeah, we like the look of that, we think it's achievable, it certainly meets the criteria that we want. And so they allocate a certain amount of money towards that. The next sort of phase is to develop that scheme and move it on to with the aim of designing the scheme, engaging with residents, getting it as suitable scheme as possible. And then we have to populate a business case. Business case has 5 areas. It has the strategic case, the economic case, management case, commercial case, and financial case. So as part of developing the scheme, we also have to develop the business case. So into that will go the design, but it'll also go the feedback that we get. It'll also go establishing baselines for monitoring, and it'll have, we'll set targets of what we want to achieve by implementing the scheme. It then is for TFGM and the Mayor's Challenge Fund to decide whether that's approved, and we progress. At the moment, we're at the stage where we're wanting to do a trial to ascertain whether we can get the business case, and we want to use the trial to be able to inform the business case and put information into that. Nothing that we're going to be doing as part of the trial will be a built scheme. It still needs to go through full approval to get a built scheme. The consultation will be part of the trial, so anything that we get feedback in the trial will be put into the business case and considered. Just a little bit about the Mayor's Challenge Fund and how they assess it. It's all around the made to move policy that they have. It's quite a long document. We'll try and post it up online, but essentially it's the barometer of the whether it works or not is whether a competent 12-year-old is comfortable cycling down there, or if it's wide enough for a double buggy to pass. So that's essentially what we're striving to achieve, that people are comfortable for their 12-year-old to go out and cycle on the street, and that people who have a double buggy are able to get around the area. In terms of design requirements and review, we constantly have to have a dialogue with the MCF team about the design review. So anything that we propose, we'll have to speak to them and make sure it fits their criteria. And also, we need to complete a Streets for All checklist, which would then feed into the business case before anything could get approved. For the actual scheme, the main sort of objectives are detailed here. So we'll mention about the active neighbourhood based around the 10-minute walk at its heart. There's a couple more information on the next slide, but essentially we're wanting to get people more active, so making those smaller journeys if possible. So that would lead to a reduction in car use for the shorter trips. Also focusing around where those journeys are taking place. So we know that a lot of people are making those journeys locally to and from schools. So we want to try and improve the safety around those schools. And core to this scheme and also to the Mayor's Challenge Fund is to increase active modes of transport like walking and cycling. And the final point there is it's been identified, obviously the A6 is a main severance point in the area, so we're trying to improve how we get across that severance point, and also underneath the railway line there's certain points, there's only fixed points where we can get under, so look at trying to improve those. Just linked to the point before, this stat that we've got, that 30% at the moment, 30% of the trips under 1 kilometre are made by car. So we're trying to change that and reduce the amount of those trips, so that if we can get people doing those trips, walking and cycling, that takes nearly a third of the traffic under that 1 kilometre off the streets. Just in terms of overall why we're doing it, hopefully you'll be aware, but Manchester City Council's declared a climate emergency, so everything we do now has a focus on reducing carbon and trying to do things in the most carbon sustainable ways. So that would be including trying to reduce where we can car use and promote active modes of travel and link it into any of the public transport. And finally, just on there, the air quality, it's by virtue of reducing numbers of car journeys made, we hope, and it has been done in other areas, that the air quality in the overall area improves, which is obviously a good thing for everyone. Just a little bit about project elements. So the filtered neighbourhood, the main thing that we're talking about in terms of the trial, that's made up of the modal filters, but also traffic calming where we can't introduce modal filters, changing priorities where it's more appropriate, improving roads as much as we can. There's additional element to it in terms of looking at crossings and junction improvements. We've had really good feedback from Commonplace, and where people have identified where crossings and junctions need to be improved. I think we've got about 25 locations there where people have sort of said there needs to be either installation or an improvement in what's already there. We want to use that information along with identifying where people are going to be wanting to go, sort of the desire routes of where people want to go, anywhere that's has issues with accidents, etc., and start to try and improve junctions and improve crossings, because it all fits into this filtered neighbourhood that we want to be able to create the safe links through roads. So where a road isn't blocked by a modal filter, we'll try and improve it. So we'll try and reduce traffic speeds through traffic calming, and also link the roads together. If we've got a key road that's severance point, we try and link that through improved crossings. Third element of it is, I suppose, around activation and helping people be more active and breaking down the barriers of or perceived barriers of what they may have for not getting on a bike, or maybe a barrier for not being able to walk very far, etc. So bike hangers are a cycle storage option that we'd have on the street, where residents would have a key. There's space for 6 people, put a bike in there, and it saves you having to either store it in your house or in the shed. The parklet, we've looked at various options for parklets, and one's been suggested along the A6 to almost break up people's walking journeys, so it helps people who maybe can't walk the long distances. Also, it becomes more of a place to go to, a place to meet, a place to, it's changing the area slightly, it's improving it, it's an outdoor space now. And the bike ports is, and linked to sort of bike storage, essentially just improving the amounts of options for where you can lock your bike up in the area. And the final bit, Abigail's going to mention a little bit more about school streets, but we're looking at improving the safety around schools by what we can do in terms of the streets very close to it, so that we can encourage people to walk or cycle, and certainly discourage the really poor parking outside certain streets. And the same for the play streets, where people may want to close their road for a day and basically take over the road and have it as a play street and things like that. So all these are kind of on the go. It's not just the filtered neighbourhood.
Great, thanks. Abigail, do you want to take over from here?
Sure. I'm Abigail Pound. I work for Sus Johnson in our collaborative design team focusing on community engagement. This slide here is talking about access to a car by a household, and actually in Levenshulme 39% of households actually do not own a car in the scheme area in Levenshulme and Burnage. And this is much higher than the UK average of 25.3%, and it's higher again than the Greater Manchester average. So there's actually a really large proportion of households there that, that don't actually have access to a car currently. And this is kind of drawing that link, the correlation between people on lower incomes and car ownership levels. So people on lower incomes are more likely to not have access to a car. So the scheme is likely to benefit those people in terms of improving conditions for walking and cycling for them. So to run through the engagement to date, so right at the beginning, there was 3 public meetings at Arcadia where the enthusiasm for the scheme was kind of really shown by the people that came there, and people understood a lot of the issues faced in Levenshulme and thought that an active neighbourhood scheme would be a really positive way of responding to a lot of the issues in the area, and they were really well attended. And they then led to the submission of the bid, which has led to the funding coming into Levenshulme for this scheme. As part of that, a lot of local residents did a community street audit, and that supported the bid as well. They went out and they looked at the street environment and what the issues were there, and that helped really build a picture of the nature of the neighbourhood. Once the funding was agreed for the scheme, there was a lot of promotion of the Levenshulme Bee Network and active neighbourhood scheme events across the area. So kind of group meetings and lots of different events. There were stalls, and it was promoted widely and encouraging people to engage with the programme. So there was the Tell Us About Your Street survey that went out to every household in the scheme area. There was a commonplace online map. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Sus Johnson has been working with the primary schools in the scheme area, including Acacia's, Cringle Park, St Mary, St Andrews and Chapel Street. We also work with Levenshulme High as well, and they were very much working with their friends and family to encourage people to go online. We did some homework with all the schools, so they went home and they encouraged their families to engage with Commonplace and to put comments on the map as well. To reach out to a wider audience and to improve representation across the area, we organised a series of pop-up events at Inspire, outside Tesco, on Burnage Lane, at Medina Mosque, and on Seddon Street as well. We spoke to over 150 people through those events and recorded their comments. There was then a community representatives workshop, so we reached out to representatives from faith groups, schools, friends of parks, residents associations, groups across the area, local business, and people came along to that workshop, and that was the beginning of the co-design process, and Julia is going to talk a little bit more about that in a little while. That was followed on by a drop-in session where we looked at road classification, and over 100 people attended that workshop as well. That was then followed up by a couple more sort of detailed co-design workshops that we organised, one at Christchurch, South Manchester, and the other one at Arcadia. Those workshops, we started to work up the filtered neighbourhood design principles with people and shared the findings so far from the engagement process. So the survey that went out to the 9,000 households within the project area boundary, there was a request for an extension of the project area, and that took place in April, and the map was kind of amended on Commonplace at that point. So those additional areas, the sort of north of Matthews Lane and the south and east, were added on. So those houses didn't receive the initial postal survey. Lots of people completed that. 590 households sent that back in for us, either online or via post, and that covered 163 streets across the area in terms of responses. So the Commonplace map ran alongside this. These postcards that are on there were kind of widely distributed, and we got 919 comments when we extracted the data at the beginning of February and started to analyse that as part of the design process. And I think we got 486 unique respondents on there on Commonplace. So this is some information. Commonplace, we were able to collect some demographic information. So this slide clarifies that. In terms of the data that we had around age is most recent, 2018, and the ethnicity data is from 2011, but this is the comparison here. So you see in green, that's the Commonplace map respondents, and blue is the makeup of the area. So as I mentioned, we had a series of pop-up events, and where the comments had a specific kind of geographical location, we mapped that information as well. We were able to map the information coming in that tell us about your street survey, where people were telling us about their individual road. We were able to map that information, and obviously the Commonplace map information was mapped. So we were able to look at all of that information together and to analyse it. So there's more information in the short report, which was made available yesterday, so I don't imagine people have had a chance to read that, but you know, there's more information in there for you to go and have a look at afterwards. And some of the key findings from that, in terms of the tells us about your street survey, were the speeding cars, litter, too many cars, pavement parking. So they were the sort of the top 5 sort of dislikes from people that sent that survey back in for us. And then in terms of Commonplace, the top concerns that we saw emerging were that there's too much traffic, walking here is not pleasant, I don't feel safe here, traffic is too fast, and the issue of traffic pollution. So yeah, there's more information in the report on that for you to have a look at, the key findings there.
So I'm going to take over now. My name is Julia. I work as an engineer for Sustrans, and I've been working with the project team on developing the design proposals. I'm just going to take you through a bit of the design thinking and approach. Obviously it's quite complex, so I'd appreciate if people can maybe pause on the Q&As for a bit, and we can just sort of go through it, and then we can start posting them again at the end of the session. I think it's just, yeah, it's quite difficult to, I think, get the message across online. So it would be great if I could sort of have your undivided attention. So the process kind of started with data analysis. That's kind of, you know, the sort of starting point for any engineering project. And we looked at kind of the collision data, a lot of the collisions that have been happening. And obviously we see quite a few of them on major roads. But what's really interesting is that when you look in kind of more detail, they don't happen anywhere on the major road. They tend to happen at the junctions. So where the major road intersects maybe a minor road, and many of these collisions are because the traffic volumes on the quieter streets are very high. So when someone's trying to cross the road, they'll get hit, or if the cars are sort of turning in and off the major road, those tend to lead to a lot of collisions. So it's not just because of the traffic volume on the major road, which is obviously part of it, but also because there are lots of cars going on the quieter residential streets. We also looked at traffic data. So this is telemetric data for all of 2019. We were planning on doing sort of physical traffic counts, but obviously COVID happened, so it would have shown very little traffic. The graph here shows the size of the pie chart. The bigger the pie, the more traffic. And the red amount is through traffic, and the blue amount is local traffic. So you can see that on most streets, well, across the whole area, I guess, a lot of the traffic is through traffic. You know, the local traffic makes a very small amount. So we started co-creating the proposals, and I know some of you were attending some of the co-design workshops, others didn't attend. We would have loved to have a 30,000 people event. That would have been quite challenging to manage, but there were a lot of people that attended. We had one in Burnage as well. And kind of this is the street set classification exercise that we did. And we looked at classifying red roads as strategic roads, blue roads as connectors, and the rest as residential. You'll see this is an overlay of kind of the tracing paper that we use, and you'll see on the left some of the outputs. Actually, a lot of kind of quite consistency in identifying definitely the red routes, you know, the A roads. The blue routes, there was a lot more discussion and debate. Understandably, different people have different perceptions of if roads should be connectors or not. And this is kind of the takeaway that we came away with. So we kind of these are kind of the sort of summary of the community engagement event. And then there's obviously sort of engineering expertise to work on this and develop, determine which of these blue routes should still be open to through traffic, and which ones should not. And there was a lot of debate, particularly for the streets in this area, so Irwood Road, Burnage Lane, and Slade Lane. Obviously, some people thought, they're important links that cars should be using, but other people, suggested, well, there's a lot of schools, and actually, should the traffic not really be on the parallel A roads? Is that, they're very close? Are people just using it to avoid the traffic lights on the major roads? And similarly, a lot of discussion around Grangeshope Drive and Crossley. Crossley is a bit larger. Grangeshope feels a bit more residential. So some very interesting conversations there that we took away to kind of make the final decision on the, for the trial, to make the decision on the filtered neighborhood boundaries. So this is the kind of the map that we came up with. So you'll see that Irwood, Slade, and Burnage were determined to be local routes, so for access only, so they should not be used for through traffic. And the main reason for this is because they are parallel to sort of A roads in very close proximity. So it was really felt that the traffic should be using those roads instead of going past all the schools, particularly on those two streets. In terms of Grangeshope Drive, I'll touch on this further later, but I think in nature, yes, ideally it would maybe be an access-only route, but there's no obvious A road parallel to it, where traffic should be taking. So there's more of an issue. If you look at Slade Lane, the traffic should obviously go onto the Kingsway. If you look at Grangeshope Drive, there's no obvious place for that traffic to go to on a parallel route. This is in more detail, the traffic data that we collected, and you can see just the amount of through traffic using particularly Burnage Lane, the amount of traffic, through traffic using Alma Road, Clare Road. So through traffic can be removed from these residential streets and can evaporate, which I'll touch on later. Even Marshall has very high volumes of through traffic. So I'm just going to try to talk you through kind of the design approach on informing where the filters go. I know this is a bone of contention, and put our hands up. We haven't provided this level of detail in the information, so it's understandable that people don't quite understand the rationale of why are we putting bus gates, why are we putting them where we're putting them. So the kind of two design principles of a filtered neighborhood is that every property can still be accessed by car. This is essential. We understand people have reduced mobility, or we understand people, have to do longer car journeys, and the scheme would never remove that access. But the second principle is that cars can't travel straight through the neighborhood. So if you want to travel straight through the neighborhood, you've got to do it on one of the outside roads, not through it. So we started by looking at the north-south routes through the neighborhood, which are the ones highlighted in blue here. And then we thought, where should we put a modal filter to make sure that these movements can't happen anymore by car? So, we could maybe put one at the south here, but that would displace the issue onto the two parallel routes. So we want to put, as few filters as possible along these two sections. And you'll see that the two obvious places are over the Fallowfield Loop, because that's where there's only two filters that are required. So that's where we've proposed them. Obviously, buses need to still travel north-south through the area, so we couldn't have a physical bollard in the way. We had to propose a bus gate, which is effectively a bollard, but there's a gap in the middle that a bus can go through. And you'll see another couple of complementary filters just to make sure that some of the other rat runs don't open up. This one here is particularly worth discussing. So there's obviously a signalized junction here. And traffic may, particularly going northbound, people might just duck off the A6 and just go along this parallel route to bypass some of the queuing traffic. So we felt like a filter down here would just make sure that movement isn't happening and this street remains access only rather than open to through traffic. Just quickly touching on a bus gate. I know they've got a bad rep in Manchester, but there are residential bus gates in lots of cities across the UK. I've listed just some of them: Aberdeen, Chelmsford, Basildon, Colchester, Wapping, Sheffield, and many more. You'll see that the right is a picture of what it could look like. So it's just very simple, a couple of build outs. These are temporary, so they can be removed. And it just very clearly says buses only. And there's a camera that makes sure that only buses go through. There can be exemptions for blue badge holders in particular. This will obviously be subject to discussion with sort of the local residents, but that is obviously something that's possible to arrange. In terms of a filter, what does a filter look like? You'll see a picture here on the bottom left from one that was put in during COVID, which, very simply cut through a few planters, plonked down, and people can walk and cycle through, and they can drive all the way up to it, but they can't drive through it. So once we've put these two filters for north-south, we have to look at east-to-west routes. And these are obviously mostly through Alma Road and Clare Road. And you'll see here that actually the location of one bus gate over the Fallowfield Loop already meant that one of the two east-to-west routes was no longer possible. So there's only one that was still open. And this is where we put the other filter just by the railway bridge. So this makes sure that there are no, that through traffic can't cut through the area north, south, and east, west. The last bit is the corner cutting. So this is to avoid traffic lights. So, people that are maybe trying to avoid the traffic lights to turn left here might cut here along Burnage Hall Road. And similarly up in the top left, Marshall had a lot of through traffic, potentially partly because of this sort of corner cutting. So we added a couple of modal filters here, one by the railway bridge and one here. And kind of this is what the final map looks like. So that's the reason, kind of the rationale behind the proposals. And you'll see the final map, which you'll have seen. Actually, you'll notice the filter here on Burnage Hall Road, we've actually moved it following resident feedback. Rightly, they pointed out that they would rather have access off Rangelop Drive, where they can turn left or right, instead of being forced only with a left in and a left out on Kingsway. So we've made that adjustment following feedback. I think this is quite a useful map in terms of showing what in practice this will mean for people who need to drive. So it shows that for each painted area, it kind of shows the access routes and it shows how far you can drive. So if you want to access off Crossley Road or Grange-Shop Drive, you can drive up to the bus gate, but you can go no further. So all the through traffic that's currently getting into Linden, into Mulwayne, onto Burnage, it really can't get through. There is no reason they would want to enter the area because there is no way that they'll be able to get through. And there will be lots of signage, there'll be signs saying no through route to here, no through route to there. And obviously Google and Waze will be notified so that they know that it's not a through route and it won't direct those Uber drivers, those delivery drivers down the roads. So we really think, evidence from previous scheme is that, the whole area effectively becomes a bit of a cul-de-sac for driving with much, much quieter streets, much, much slower speeds, delivering the kind of benefits that the scheme aims to deliver. In terms of the impact, I've quickly highlighted here in green the streets where we expect substantial reductions in traffic volumes. So these are all the ones that are within the area. So Slade Lane, Scarisbrick, Mulwayne, Burnage, Linden Park, Alma Road, all will benefit from substantial reductions in through traffic, which will obviously improve road safety and air quality. Crossing the road will be a lot easier. Walking and cycling will be so much more pleasant, which we've seen during lockdown how much more enjoyable and pleasant it is to walk down a quieter road. And this kind of picture in the top left shows the kind of impact. So this is a filter that was put in just last week in Dulwich. This is the road how it was before, which I'm sure will be familiar to many. If you think about Irwood or Clare Road or Alma, this is what the experience is at the moment. And this is after the filter was put in. So you can see the transformation of how quiet it is, how pleasant it is, the air quality is improved, and it's just much more pleasant to walk and cycle. It's so much easier to cross. So it's effectively delivering a sort of vast well-being improvements on that residential streets. So you'll see on the left, less speeding, less traffic, up to 90% reductions, easier to cross, improved air quality. And it, in terms of walking and cycling, we've seen some comments about why aren't we improving walking and cycling with cycle lanes? This is effectively making it really safe. And a lot of new people have sort of ventured back out on their bicycles maybe during lockdown because the streets have been really, really quiet. And this is what the scheme will achieve in the area. Obviously, I've seen some questions already in the Q&A about impact on drivers, and obviously it will be a little bit less convenient to drive for sure. So I've mapped some of the trips to the Tesco's, for example, for someone who maybe lives on Cringle Hall Road at the moment. They can just drive quickly, and it's a 4-minute drive, very quick. This was sort of on a Sunday or a Saturday shop. It's quite a trip. And with the filter, it'll have all the way around, down Grange Drive and around, which will add 2 to 6 minutes. It will be a bit less convenient. But by comparison, it's only a 12-minute walk, and it's only about a 3-minute cycle. So we really hope, some journeys to Tesco's you'll still have to do by car, if you're doing a very big shop for all your family. But actually, we've seen almost 40% of Levenshulme don't have a car, and they can still do weekly shops. So it's still possible maybe to walk some of those trips, or cycle some of those trips, maybe do smaller shops. And this is kind of the basis for traffic evaporation. So when people ask, how is traffic going to evaporate? This is exactly it. Some of the local trips that previously were done by car, all of a sudden driving is a little bit less convenient. Walking is a lot more pleasant. So I'll walk in instead of driving. And that's one less car on the road. And it's one less car on all the streets that it goes along. I also looked at some of the community impacts for people that need to drive into Manchester. So I simulated what it would be like at 8:15 on a weekday. At the moment, obviously, someone on Millwayne will just drive up north straight through, and it takes 5 to 8 minutes to get up to Stockport Road and then further north. So this will add 2 to 4 minutes on their journey time, which is obviously it's a bit of an increase. But if you've got maybe a half an hour commute, it's less than 10%. So it's kind of a little bit more inconvenient, but obviously the benefit, which we've seen before, particularly in the video, of a much more pleasant local environment. Obviously, the kind of the big question that I've already seen in the chat is kind of the impact on the boundary roads, particularly Grangethorpe Road. And the evidence from similar schemes does suggest a short-term increase in traffic volumes. And I think we've been very open about this. Obviously, when you close streets, the first day cars will go somewhere else. And so in the short term, there tends to be a bit of an increase from other schemes. This tends to be between 3 and 28%. But then over time, when people, change their behaviors, maybe they start walking some of those trips, that traffic tends to evaporate. And the traffic volumes, even on the boundary roads, become lower. They return to what they were before the scheme was introduced. And obviously that means that across the whole neighborhood, there are many fewer cars, there's less fumes being emitted. So the benefits really are to everyone, not just to those on those residential streets. In addition, on the boundary roads in particular, someone may live on a boundary road, but lots of their trips will be through the rest of the neighborhood. So those links will be much safer. They'll be much more convenient. They'll be much more enjoyable. Even on the boundary road themselves, I touched before on how a lot of the collisions on boundary roads are due to cars turning on and off them. And those, by filtering the side roads, there'll be much fewer cars, turning on and off the major roads, which make crossing those roads a lot safer and a lot easier, particularly for people walking, but also for people cycling. And obviously there is a plan to improve crossings as well and introduce traffic calming, which Andrew talked on at the start, which will be part of the kind of improvements as well on Grangethorpe Drive. So kind of the point at the bottom that, there's going to be an overall reduction, which everyone will benefit from. And particularly, when you're undertaking your daily trips, the school run or the shopping trip, visiting friends, even if you do live on a boundary road, you will still experience that benefit. And within 3 to 6 months, we really do expect a lot of traffic to evaporate and the traffic volumes on your streets, even on the boundary roads, to return to what they were before, where before it's difficult to determine also because of COVID, but that's a separate conversation. So I quickly wanted to touch on the alternatives, and I've seen already in the chat someone saying, why can't we not have the bus gates? So this is what the scenario would look like if you were to remove the bus gates. So obviously these north-south routes suddenly become available again, so traffic can still use them. So there are very little or no improvements on Burnage Lane, on Irwood Road, on Slade Lane, which remain heavily trafficked, heavily polluted, very difficult to cross. And, particularly with the schools there, they're just unlikely to see an improvement to conditions, which, we obviously want those streets to be safer for people to walk and cycle. The other complexity in the design is that without a bus gate, Marshall Road has to stay open, which means we can't filter Alma, because otherwise that would force all the traffic back onto Marshall, which is a residential street. So both Marshall and Alma have to remain open, which potentially opens some east to west routes again. And I've put a yellow filter on Linden Park because it is quite long and narrow, and it's, it's unclear whether a dust car or a refuse vehicle could reverse all the way down. It could be quite dangerous. So it's one that we'd have to do more work on. And also some of these other filters which we've put down, obviously we'd have to do more work with the community to determine where they'd go. But I think the highlight to me is that the improvements in terms of like how many of the local streets are being improved. There are many fewer streets in this scenario. So this kind of shows how many streets will see a reduction in traffic volumes, and all of a sudden it only becomes Claresbrook, Millwane, Clare Road, and actually kind of Burnage Lane and Irwood Road, which already have lots of issues, will not really benefit from any improvement. So it's interesting for me to see, a lot of people on Grangethorpe saying, why can't we have less traffic? But then equally a lot of people saying, why can't Burnage and Irwood not have a bus gate? And because those kind of two tensions for me is something that's difficult to resolve and something that's worth thinking about. And I would also say, the boundary roads, even in this scenario on Grangethorpe side, there's still going to be a bit of an increase in traffic, particularly the east to west routes. People will still be coming down and still using Grangethorpe Drive. It's not like they'll be using another road. So I still think even with this scenario, Grangethorpe would likely see a short-term increase in traffic. The second alternative, which I quickly wanted to touch on, is the idea of filtering Grangethorpe Drive, which obviously is one that we thought about. And as I said before, there's no real alternative obvious east to west route. So if we just filtered Grangethorpe Drive, then the traffic would go down Burnage Lane South and Moldith Road, which I'm told has some schools and lots of traffic issues already. So it wouldn't kind of be an obvious route. And even further down to Green End Road. I mean, the obvious parallel closest east to west route is down here on Didsbury Road, which is about 3 kilometers away, which is a very, very long way away. So you can see, while with Irwood and Burnage, it was easy to sort of pick the A roads next to them. With Grangethorpe Drive, it's really hard. And this basically means that this whole area would have to be filtered, which is much bigger than the project scope. It's also much bigger than any filtered neighborhood delivered anywhere. Obviously, as you've seen before, kind of one of the fundamental principles is that as a resident, you can only access one of the boundary roads. So there will be someone here, which their only way in and out of the cell will be all the way down to the bottom, about a 3 kilometer detour, which is a very, very long way. So just touching on cell sizes, because I think it's worth kind of, I've seen some comments on this as well. The balance is that an area that is too small, like for example, if we were to do this, these are very, very small areas. The benefits are only felt on very few roads. You also don't create many routes to walk and cycle, because you'll walk a short distance, but then you'll have a busy road. So that means there's less traffic evaporation, and it's more likely that we'll just get traffic displacement. But similarly, if a cell becomes too large, it becomes very inconvenient for a lot of traffic, and some of the trips are less likely to be switchable. This is a bit trickier to get your head around, but if the area is this big, and you've got to, a lot of the sort of traffic that's coming through the area has to, instead of using some of the quieter streets, use the major roads, it's still not likely enough to be a disincentive. So we talk about the switchable journeys as the ones that are in the region of 1 kilometer. So those are the ones that are easier to switch to walking and cycling. The 10 kilometer journeys, it's less likely someone will cycle them. So we usually look at 1 kilometer journey, and we look at 1 square kilometer for a cell size, which is exactly what the current area is. So this is about 1 square kilometer. And just comparing it to other areas that have been delivered. So some of smaller areas have been delivered in Hackney and Waltham Forest, but increasingly we're seeing proposals more towards the square kilometer and maybe a little bit above that, but nothing kind of in the 5.5 square kilometer region, which we get with Grangethorpe Drive being filtered. And I would say the point at the bottom is definitely a valid one, that this is kind of phase 1 of the project, and once behaviors change and people start walking and cycling a lot more, and that traffic evaporates, it then becomes easier to build on and maybe extend the scheme further south into Burnage, which can also obviously deserve some of the benefits, and we can also look at maybe filtering some of the roads down there just to make sure that that area as well doesn't suffer from through traffic.
Okay, I'll pick this one up. So just a little bit on the school streets project. Obviously, we've been working with schools in Levenshulme and Burnage, and there's 6 primary schools involved with the project, and we have engaged with Levenshulme High as well. But the 6 primary schools actually did the big street survey around their school and their school journeys, and looking at their experience on the way to school and how that could be improved. And there's a lot of common issues around the schools that were highlighted, such as the dangerous junctions and crossing points that need to be improved, pavement parking issues, closing the space for walking, noise levels and air quality as well, concerns for the children. So we've developed design proposals for the street environment at each of the schools. And one of the key design solutions that's been recommended for each of the schools is the school street timed closures, which can help tackle the parking issues outside of the school, the drop off and pick up times. And I think the sort of aspiration for school street time closures was included in the vision map. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit more and what we mean by that. So the idea is that the area outside the school is closed during that kind of time where parents are dropping their children off and picking them up. But there's still access for residents, so nobody's hemmed in, everybody can still get to their property, emergency vehicles can still get through, and it's not a fixed filter in the road as we would see with the filtered neighbourhood modal filters. So in talking with the schools, we met with sort of 5 of the 6 primary schools this week to talk about the potential for a 1-day trial of a timed closure, and they're keen on having a go at those. So we're looking at sort of September, October time for those, and there's an opportunity there for people to experience what that's like, to feedback on it, parents, for residents to sort of experience it, and to sort of have a chance to sort of feedback. So there's also been an announcement, or so there's a question in Parliament to the Transport Secretary of State on enforcement outside of London. Because Greater London, they have powers for enforcement, which frustratingly haven't been available outside. So there's obviously going to be moves to change that, hopefully, which will help with the kind of long-term running of these timed closures outside of the schools, and would enable us to be more ambitious and include more streets in those. But as I said, residents still gain access. Another key sort of element is the sort of extra support to schools and support to around kind of activation. So park and strides, looking at key locations for parking and stride, so that parents can, Tesco's is one of them, which parents can sort of, if they do need to drive, they can go then, they can drop off at Alma Park, they can drop off at St Mary's, and other initiatives such as walking buses, and a lot of parents in the schools have been really keen to see these encouraged. So there's going to be an increase in walking buses that will help people to get to school on foot, and because we know that people face a lot of challenges in the morning and dropping children off in multiple locations, so we really need to work with the schools and work with the families to support people to transition to walking and cycling for those journeys to and from school, and to improve the environment outside of the schools.
Right, yeah, just to talk about the next steps. I think everyone will be aware now that we're in a pause in how we're sort of progressing with this. We were planning on doing a trial, we're still planning on going out with the trial. So I suppose this is in stages now. So the pause is in stages. So the stage 1 is to show you what the proposal was, and the background to it all, to show you that there is reasoning behind it. And I think that information that Julio's mentioned in the presentation will help you with that, plus the report, etc., and show the reasoning behind why that design has been suggested. I know a few people seem to have picked up on it. It's been the final design. It's not. That's why I think Ben was quite quick to sort of say it's not been agreed. This is something that we need to have something to go out to people with, and we need to be able to show them something so that people can get an idea of what it could be. The same premise for the trial. We want to be able to use a trial to see whether it works, because you'll have people look at a plan and go, that won't work. You'll have people saying that will work. The trial's there to test whether something will work. So the next stage would be, in terms of this pause, we're getting some really good feedback already. A lot of people are giving us positive feedback, giving us really constructive feedback, and it's helpful. We had conversations with various residents in all areas about how we can improve this. So we want to use those conversations, use those suggestions, and try and make it a better scheme. And then we would look at adding those suggestions in where we can, and changing it where we need to, and then present to all residents what the actual scheme is going to be before we go out to any trial. So that's just to sort of establish what this pause is. In terms of the plan for using the trial, we're going to be using a experimental traffic regulation order. So that means that once it goes in, we've got 18 months to make it permanent, or we cancel it. So the aim would be within that 18 months, we trial locations of things. We trial, and as part of that, we trial maybe putting some traffic calming at certain places. We want to try and do improve crossings and things like that. Using an experimental traffic regulation order means that we can make changes as part of that trial without having to go back and do another traffic regulation order. It means that we can move locations. As the picture on the slide suggests, it's going to be very temporary. It needs to look temporary. It's a trial. We're not building anything yet. So initially, they'll look very similar. You may have seen the rhino barriers. So there'll be those that will stop the road to start with, and then we'll start to progress on to what, as is on the picture, so using planters and things like that. So we want to, we need to ensure and want to reiterate the message. It is still a trial. Nothing is going to get built until it gets approved fully. So one of the aspects of the trial is to look at monitoring. So we've done some traffic counts, done some air quality stuff, we've done some walking and cycling counts at the moment. Plus, we're going to be working with Manchester Uni to install a load of more counts in the area. So you may see them on lampposts, sort of a square box on lampposts. Could be a traffic monitor, or it could be air quality, because we wanted to make sure that what we do has a good impact. And we've got to, as part of the, as I mentioned before, part of the business case, we need to show to TFGM that it does have a good impact. In terms of resident feedback, we've already had a lot as part of the development of this design, and we're getting loads more now. Encourage you to keep on updating on commonplace, keep on going on, giving us emails on the trial website, feedback to council if you need to. The way that the feedback gets assessed, it all gets collated together. We need to present all that information, so we'll normally get assistance from the Manchester City Council Performance Research and Intelligence team, who would be almost like an independent party, will assess it and give us some information back, say, here's the outcome of that. For this, it'll be quite a big job, so it could take a bit of time for them to get things together, or they may well go put it out to an external organisation to do so. It just wanted to reiterate that it's not a closed shop on that. It's an external to the team and external to highways. Nobody would have been involved in this before, and so they're assessing it on the face value. Then that information goes to the local councillors, and then in turn to our executive member for highways to make the decision whether the scheme goes ahead or not. It's through the delegated approvals process, which we can put more information online about rather than going through it. Additionally, TFGM will also want to know about the feedback, and all of this, as I mentioned before, goes into the business case that we have to submit to get the money. At the moment, we've said we'll do the trial, and as part of monitoring the trial, that information goes into the business case. We submit and say, we'd like to build these. We'd like to build this as an active neighbourhood, please. And so all components, so it would be the filters, plus crossings, plus traffic calming, plus any other improvements, plus anything we've got in terms of activation. So any bike hangers, any bike parking, things like that, would all be included in our submission to TFGM. And then the final bit is around communicating the outcomes. I think this is just, as I mentioned about the stage stuff, we're sending out an awful lot of information now, and it will be almost like a constant update for you. We'll always make sure that at key points we'll send out, so we're going to send a letter out in the next week to confirm what's going on now, and confirm to make sure that people, because obviously yourselves have been made aware of it, but we want to let all residents made aware of it. We'll make sure that it's in appropriate languages, etc. So, and then once we've got the design to a stage where we think we're comfortable to go back out and say, here's our suggestion, we'll write out again with the full design and with the sort of rationale behind it, so everyone will get information about it.
Great. So we're just that's the end of the presentation. So we're gonna do, the first part of the Q&A is gonna be from Slido, so the top most upvoted questions, and then Ben Craig will pick some questions out of the live Q&A for us to answer, hopefully trying to mix up some of the questions, so not going back to some of the stuff that we touched on. I did briefly want to clarify one thing. It was rightly raised in the chat about the filter on Nile Street and Henderson Street. The fact that that junction northbound, obviously at the moment, is always on a red light, with the one with Broom Lane, but further south there is a signalized pedestrian crossing, so if that light is red, there's still a benefit to using that cut through. And also I would say that as part of the kind of the trials in the eastern area, in the Chapel Street area, we're looking at potentially reintroducing a right turn from Broom Lane onto the A6, which obviously would add a second set of traffic lights. So we really do want to sort of ensure that no one uses that cut through. So that's the reason that filter is there at the moment, or is proposed, sorry, to be there at the moment. So we'll quickly whiz through these Slido questions. The first question is, why does Burnage Hall Road, wide, relatively quiet, get a filter, yet there are no traffic calming measures for Grangethorpe, which is narrow, is a rat run, and is dangerous? The reason, I think, as I said before, so obviously there's an obvious sort of parallel A road to Burnage Hall Road, which is where the through traffic should be going. So it makes it easier in that sense to propose a filter there. On Grangethorpe Drive, obviously the proposals do not at the moment have a filter there. We will look at sort of introducing traffic calming and potentially crossings as well as part of the wider scheme. But for the time being, I think kind of the two are separate issues. It's not one versus the other. It's addressing the two in isolation. The second question is for Andrew.
Yep. So how will the traffic pollution noise be measured before and after? As I mentioned before, we've done some traffic counts pre-COVID. We're also looking at getting more units set up all around, which will count traffic and also air quality, etc. We'll also be able to get the sort of rubber strips that go on the ground on roads at key locations. We've had these discussions with people. People are flagging up certain areas that they've got concerns. So we want to be able to make sure that it's not a concern area. So we want to be able to measure that and say that. So we'll be establishing almost before and after and how it's working. And then success will be that overall levels go down, and it'll be the assessment of overall traffic levels, etc. So we want to be able, I want to sort of emphasize that we don't want to make things worse for people in different areas. We want this an improvement for all the people within. I know we keep on mentioning Levenshulme Burnage area. So we will use this information and make that assessment. And if it's not working and it hasn't worked, please be under no illusions that it's a trial and we'll pull back and it won't go in. So I just wanted to sort of emphasize that.
The third question, similar to the first one, why a bus gate on Slade Lane, a relatively big road? It forces traffic down smaller and currently more congested roads like Grangethorpe and Cringle. I'm not sure Cringle will get more traffic. I think Grangethorpe Drive, as I touched on before, I think in the short term may see a bit of an increase, but that will sort of is expected to turn back to pre-trial levels as behavior changes. I would say that the alternative of not putting a bus gate on Slade Lane, as I've shared before, that doesn't mean that Grangethorpe won't see an increase in traffic. I think the idea of a filtered neighborhood, the evidence shows that a filtered neighborhood is the best approach to reduce traffic volumes through a whole area. And the kind of idea of not putting filters in or putting fewer filters in will just mean that reduction in traffic is less likely, and you'll still get a traffic increase on the boundary road. So I really would like to sort of separate the two in people's minds. Fourth question, Andrew.
Yeah, is it true the project leaders live and own property on the roads that's set to benefit the most? Well, I suppose it's twofold. No, because I don't live in Levenshulme. I live in Salford, so I'm not going to get any direct benefit of this. There's people that are involved from the Levenshulme Bee Network who live in the area. To say that their road's going to benefit the most is tricky because we think that the whole area is going to benefit the most. So an individual road over another, we're filtering a number of roads. So there's going to be, we want a benefit across the whole of the area. So no, I don't think that it's, no, as I say, I'm the project manager, project leader, so I don't live or own a property in the area. Next one. What happens when there's flooding along Crossley? Yep, it's a known flood spot. What we will do, there's options to be able to, if we have the bus gates in, we can have signage which is activated if it floods, and then we can sort of advise people to say use bus gate routes. And the nature of how a bus gate would work is that it's ANPR, so as you drive through, you then get sent something in the post, so it doesn't block you in any way. So we're able to stop those fines going through, and we can link it to certain signage to be able to flag up to people. Additionally, if we're including a filter further up under another one of the tunnels, the filters can have removable bollards, so we can go out and remove that. Just, I suppose, linked into that, all the temporary filters are going to have removable bollards, so that people, we're working with the emergency services. We've passed the information out to them, and we work with them on a regular basis to make sure that it's fit for purpose. We'll also have a bollard that they'll be able to remove if needs be, but at the heart of this is we're not stopping anyone getting access to a certain property, but if they need to get somewhere as quick as possible, we'll be able to, they can remove the bollards. So that's the work we've been doing with them to make sure it's safe for them to progress through the area. But by default, if it's quieter on the roads and those residential roads, they don't have to weave in and out, so they can go more quickly through those roads. So next one, how will we measure increased traffic congestion, pollutants on border roads? It links into the earlier one around monitoring. We're going to be putting monitoring around all roads, so that will include the border roads such as Grangethorpe and Crossley, to make sure that it does work for people and it's not impacting them massively. We want to work with you and work with the councillors to make sure that it's a fit for purpose scheme.
The next question is about compensation for local residents who will lose property value due to measures introduced through this project. It's interesting because in the last webinar, there was a question around gentrification, so increasing property value. I think the scheme is going to deliver benefits across the whole neighborhood. I don't think any particular property will see their value reduced because of the scheme. And actually the evidence from Waltham Forest in terms of kind of air quality impact is that there was a reduction or an improvement in air quality across the whole area. So I mean, so there's obviously no compensation for an individual unless they specifically, and unless there's demonstrable evidence that they have directly suffered from the scheme. But I read it out, individuals will lose property value. Where will the school traffic that is displaced from Irwood Road and Slade Lane go? How does it evaporate? If it doesn't, where does it park? Yeah, this is a good question, and definitely schools are, as people have picked up in the chat, are kind of the added challenge of this area from a filtered neighborhood perspective. The evidence again is that when you implement a filtered neighborhood, you create a lot of these safer routes, which will encourage or enable a lot of school pickup and drop off to be done walking or cycling. So the quieter streets will mean it's safer to walk your kids to school, particularly a lot of the primary schools. You know, the catchment areas are very small. We really would expect a lot of people to start walking more often instead of driving. So that will reduce, so that's some of the evaporation which we expect. Some people will of course continue to drive to school. And you know, we're working with the schools, as Abigail said, on school street proposals, which can improve the safety outside of the school gates. But it's definitely a behavior change piece, and the filtered neighborhood is instrumental in enabling that mode shift for the school run. The next question is, have any other considerations such as double chicanes being given instead of bus gates on Burnage and Slade Lane? I'd say I've got a slide on this, but basically, I mean, you can put speed humps, you can put chicanes, you can put kind of anything you want, but in reality, people can still drive up somewhere. They'll drive up that road to use it as a through route until it's really, really congested, and we don't want it to get to that point. We don't want, Burnage and Slade to be so congested that people decide to go somewhere else, because we want people to cross it safely and we want it to be a low traffic environment. So that's what the bus gate allows us to achieve. On the question about 24/7, I would say through traffic isn't just in rush hours. So actually a lot of the through traffic is during the daytime. And actually outside of peak hours is where there's more speeding. So if there was no restriction outside of peak hours, you'd still get a lot of the speeding issues that you get at night or during the quieter hours of the day. So that's why they're 24/7. The last one for you, Andrew?
Yeah, it's similar sort of things before that on Grainsthorpe. If we report, it's more busy. We're going to be monitoring all the roads to see if there is an increase in traffic along those roads. One thing to sort of add that we've been looking at trying to make improvements on those roads, because we've identified that they're busy anyway, so we want to try and make them better. So parking is a bit of a challenge on there. So crossing, it's already got speed bumps, so looking at different things, so maybe chicanes, stuff like that. So to try and make it better for people to get around that area as well. So the filters are one part of it, but we've got other parts of it. There's other ways where we're trying to look at a wider area and whether we can disperse traffic through signage to spread it out a little bit wider, particularly if bus gates are further up on Slade and Irwood. We'll be putting signage further down to encourage people not to be driving all the way up to there to get to there to realise that they can't get through, have to turn around. So we'd be it's almost like trying to get people onto Kingsway, which is the road that people should be driving on, north to south, or on the A6 as early as possible, to reduce the impact at those smaller roads and smaller junctions like Grainsthorpe, and then further up.
Great. So those are the top questions in Slido. Now, Ben, if you want to pick some of the, I know there's 209 questions in the Q&A. I'm sure you've read them all. If you could maybe ask some, well, start with one maybe that touches on different things compared to what we've touched on so far.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to pick out some of the better questions, shall we say, the ones that are not repeating what's already been asked. I think first of all, it is important to stress that as a result of the growing interest in the community in the scheme, shall we say, that's why the pause was put in. So it's not at all about going ahead with a predetermined plan, and that's one of the reasons why this is happening and more events will happen. And I think there's some questions asked around that. There's a few questions relating to driving traffic down into Burnage, basically, that this will displace problems down further south into Burnage area. So, for example, just pick one of these questions. Okay. Apart from the Burnage Lane activity outside the shops, what was the engagement and communications held for Burnage residents, and why were we not aware until a few weeks ago, given that we will suffer a detriment? And that's from Colette Booth.
Hi, Ben. I'll respond to that. I mean, as I mentioned on the slide earlier, there was the postal survey that went out to all the houses in the scheme area, including the part of Burnage that's within the area. And we have worked with the schools within the area, and as I said, we've kind of done assemblies in the schools, and there's things that have gone out home to schools, including homework and parent mail about the project, encouraging people to go on Commonplace and link in with Commonplace. I know not everyone's on social media, but a lot of information's been put out via social media channels, and communication that's gone to councillors, and then councillors have passed that on to other people. And there have been meetings attended, such as the community forum in Burnage, and we did hold one of the events in Burnage directly, the co-design workshops in the church. So we have endeavoured to communicate as much as possible with people about the programme and about ways that they can get involved and have their say.
There's another question here from Bodrell, which states that 80% of the responses to the survey are from the Levenshulme ward area. Now, I'm just wondering if you have any figures as to how many responses there were from the Burnage part of the scheme and how many from the Levenshulme part of the scheme to the survey or to Commonplace or any of the other events.
I mean, you can see the spread from the two slides we've got there in terms of, I don't have the exact figures right now, but in terms of the spread from the postal survey and from the Commonplace survey in terms of how they're distributed. So, yeah, and we can kind of map that. We can look at that in terms of Commonplace, in terms of the where they've come from. The comments there, but you can see that there is a distribution across the whole of the scheme area.
Just to add to that quickly, I can share something later on today, but the spread of comments are actually the highest amount of comments were placed on the Cringle Park area. We had over 363 comments for that Cringle Park area. So I'll share that later on today as well. It's just an extra piece of information.
Okay, thank you. So Emily Adams is asking a question about trips that are further than 1 kilometre. She says 70% of trips are further than 1 kilometre. So where's the analysis for impact on longer trips and commutes?
Yeah, so I showed before the kind of impact on commute trips in terms of like additional distance travelled. I would say that the evidence in terms of traffic evaporation from other schemes is you can get kind of 10 to 15% of traffic evaporation of all journeys through an area, which is a substantial amount. And that's the bulk of those are those 30% of trips that are under 1 kilometre. So some people will decide to take the bus or cycle their longer journeys, but in reality, most of the mode shift and most of the evaporation will be from those shorter trips. I think when we talk about percentages, I think it's important to remind ourselves that when we talk about here, about a percentage increase on one of the boundary roads, so say Grangethorpe Drive sees an increase of 3 to 30%. But the reduction in the area is of all the trips added, and then it's 10 to 15% of that. So it's a much greater number and reduction in the total area than is the increase on the boundary roads, and that's essentially what the traffic evaporation is.
Okay, just while we're on that, Guido, there's an anonymous viewer who's asked, please provide references to statistical analysis for the 30% figure. Are we able to get those kind of details of where that analysis has come from in the future to people?
Yeah, so the Waltham Forest case study is the one that's it's been in for the longest, so they've been able to observe the effects of those. And there's a sort of paper online about it, which was done. There's one by King's College, and there's one that was done by a consultant for Waltham Forest Council. So both of those are available.
Sorry, I think that question specific. Sorry to interrupt. I think that question specifically referred to the 30% number of small journeys, local journeys under 1 kilometre. I think from the question answer, I think that number is provided by TFGM. So the answer is that number can be got from TFGM in their data, and it's also widely reported in the Mate and Move reports, which is the Walking and Cycling Commissioners reports, Chris Boardman's reports. So we can share that document as well, and it's on the website, widely available.
Okay, thanks for that. Some questions being asked about when will questions be answered, and I know that it's the intention where collective groups of questions have been answered to send them out as soon as possible. Obviously, it wasn't possible before the webinars this weekend. So obviously we should take that as noted that we will be sending those answers out to groups of people that have submitted questions. Peter Bainbridge has got a very good question here as well.